So I guess I'll introduce myself. My name is Laura Kaler. I work with South Dakota Specialty Producers Association, which is a group that helps specialty producers through education, networking, and looking for different opportunities to help everyone increase their sales and farm experience. So today, we have two individuals from FSA here to tell us about a new program on food safety certification for specialty crops. After their presentation, there'll be an opportunity for questions and answers. And then Rhoda Burrows with SDSU Extension will be chatting a little bit more about some of those different certification options. During the presentations, if you can use the chat to ask any questions, during the Q&A time, absolutely, you can unmute yourself and ask it at that point too. But if you'd like to write it down before you forget, drop it in the chat and I'll make sure those questions get relayed. Otherwise, if you're not a speaker, we'd love if you could mute your microphone. And with that, I will turn it over to Gail.
Thank you, Laura. And thank you to Laura and the Specialty Producers Association for hosting us. A really great opportunity to share with all of you about the food safety certification programs. Rhoda will have great information as well to tie it together. My name is Gail Gullickson. I do work as the State Outreach Coordinator for South Dakota FSA, and I also serve as a Senior Farm Loan Officer here in Brookings' office. So I do get to be right on the ground working with producers all the time, and we do have some vegetable producers locally who we get to work with in our office as well. And so this is just really important information, especially as they're expanding or people are looking to do things differently with their specialty crops. And so we're just glad we are forming a partnership, at least with the specialty producers, to get information out to you and have a kind of a short overview today of the program. So Danita Gary is a program director in our South Dakota FSA office, and she is going to actually tell you all the ins and outs of the program and be able to answer questions when we get done, you know, as she goes through it or as you're going. And Laura will watch the chat as well if there are questions. But it's just a great opportunity to learn about some opportunities with FSA and programs that are now being rolled out by USDA. So I will turn it over to Danita if she's ready.
Yes, can you hear me okay?
Yep,
okay.
Sounds good.
Yeah, as Gail said, I'm Danita Gary with the South Dakota Farm Service Agency. I work in the state office in Huron, but I was a program technician in the county office in Kingsbury for, about 19 years. And then I came to the state office in 2009, and I've been here since. So I've worked with many different programs. The food safety certification for specialty crops, that's a mouthful, but it's a new program to us. And so I will try to relay as much information as I know. And if you have any other questions that I can't answer, I will certainly try to get them answered for you. So with that, I have about 35 slides here that has some information. So I'll just get started. Okay. So according to the Agriculture Marketing Service website, the U.S. grade standards for specialty products are voluntary and provide the fruit, vegetable, and specialty crop industry with a uniform language for describing the quality and the conditions of commodities in the marketplace. So the background for this program is because specialty crops, they're intended for human consumption and are subject to concerns about safety, particularly since the specialty crops sold as raw agricultural commodities do not undergo a kill step, like cooking, canning, or pasteurizing used for other agricultural commodities such as meat or dairy products. So as a result, specialty crop operations are faced with increasing demand from grocery stores, schools, and other institutional buyers and retailers to obtain that certification through programs that address the safe growing, harvesting, packing, and holding of their crops. So the need to develop, implement, and maintain on-farm food safety programs has resulted in additional costs for many specialty crop operations that seek alternate markets for their products due to changes in demand from traditional markets, such as the restaurants and food service. As they identify new markets, many specialty crop operations also find they need to undergo food safety audits, and they absorb the additional cost to achieve that food safety certification through a private or government-based certification program in order to meet buyers' requirements to sell their products. So I apologize for reading the slides, but I just wanted to get through what the background of this food safety certification program and how it resulted. So the funding source, excuse me, is $200 million is provided through the CCC Charter Act, and the notice of funds of availability was published June 21st, 2022. And I've provided a link here if you wish to review that NOFA. So the sign-up period for the food safety certification for specialty crops program began June 27th, 2022, and it runs through January 31st, 2023, and that's for the program year 2022. And for program year 2023, that sign-up period will be announced at a later date. So we'll run through a few definitions that are important for when we're administering this program. So a specialty crop operation is a farming operation that produces specialty crops that are raw agricultural commodities, and it includes both individuals and legal entities. So both individuals and legal entities can make application. Also, it's very important as far as the eligibility, who is eligible. So it would be a small business is defined as an applicant that had an average annual monetary value of specialty crops that the applicant sold during the 3-year period preceding the program year of more than 250,000, but not more than 500,000. And this is similar to the Food and Drug Association's definition, but it's not identical. Also, the definition of a very small business is an applicant that had an average annual monetary value of specialty crops the applicant sold during the 3-year period preceding the program year of no more than 250,000. And this is also similar to the FDA's definition. So what are specialty crops? I'm sure many of you already know this, but I'll just go through a few of these. It's any fruit or vegetable, including mixes of intact fruits and vegetables, and includes mushrooms, sprouts, irrespective of seed source, trees, nuts, and herbs. A fruit is the edible reproductive body of a seed plant or tree, such as apple, orange, and almond, such that the fruit means the harvestable or harvested part of a plant developed from a flower. A vegetable is the edible part of a herbaceous plant, such as cabbage or potato, or fleshy fruiting body of fungus, such as white button or shiitake, grown for an edible part such that the vegetable means the harvestable or harvested part of any body or fungus whose fruit, fleshy fruiting body, seeds, roots, tubers, bulbs, stems, leaves, or flower parts are used as food and includes mushrooms, sprouts, and herbs such as basil or cilantro. This also includes sweet corn. And so what a specialty crop does not include are peanuts or food grains, meaning the small hard fruits or seeds of arable crops or the crops bearing these fruits or seeds, which are primarily grown and processed for use as meal, flour, baking goods, cereals, and oils, rather than for direct consumption as small hard fruits or seeds, including cereal grains, pseudo-cereals, oil seeds, and other plants used in the same fashion. Examples of food grains include barley, dent or flint corn, sorghum, oats, rice, rye, wheat, amaranth, quinoa, buckwheat, and oil seeds, for example, cottonseed, flaxseed, rapeseed, soybean, and sunflower seed. Okay, historically underserved farmers and ranchers. And this is important to know the definition of these, because the calculation of payment, can be a bit higher for those producers that certify to being a beginning farmer or rancher, a limited resource farmer or rancher, a socially disadvantaged farmer or rancher, or a veteran farmer or rancher. So beginning farmer or rancher is one who has not operated a farm or ranch for more than 10 years and who materially and substantially participates in the operation. For a legal entity to be considered a beginning farmer or rancher, at least 50% of the interest must be beginning farmers or ranchers. A limited resource farmer or rancher is both of the following: a person whose direct or indirect gross farm sales did not exceed a certain level, and a person whose total household income was at or below the national poverty level for a family of 4. The limited resource farmer or rancher status can be determined using a website available through the Limited Resource Farmer and Rancher online service determination through the National Resources Conservation Service. Socially disadvantaged farmer or rancher is one who is a member of a group whose members have been subject to racial, ethnic, or gender prejudice because of their identity as members of a group without regard to their individual qualities, including the following: American Indians or Alaskan Natives, Asians or Asian Americans, Blacks or African Americans, Hispanics or Hispanic Americans, Native Hawaiians or other Pacific Islanders, and women. And a veteran farmer or rancher is a person who served in active military, naval, air, or space service and who was discharged or released under conditions other than dishonorable. So for those historic underserved producers, when applying at the FSA office, we do have a form that you can certify to one of these. So eligibility: who is eligible? To be eligible for the food safety certification for specialty crops, the applicant must meet all of the following: of course, be a specialty crop operation and be a small business or a very small business.
And Danita, if I can interrupt quick on the small
Yes.
business question. Earlier you had some limits of 250,000 or 500,000. Question in the chat was if those are adjusted for inflation.
I don't know the answer to that. And for this is also a certification. So those producers at this time, they would just need to certify that they meet that. And then if they're questioned by the county committee or during a spot check, then they may be needing to prove that. But I can certainly get some information on that, unless Gail, if you're aware of the answer to that question.
The only thing I wouldn't be sure if it would be adjusted annually with the inflation. I think that's what Rhoda was getting, if it would be readdressed since this program also is continuing.
Okay.
I'm not sure if this program falls underneath that. Other programs we have
Okay.
are loan programs and amounts. Sometimes limits are adjusted. I don't know, and yeah, if Danita can check with the national office if there intends to be a adjustment made on an annual basis. This is just how the program was written for now, but that's a great question because it does go into 2023 as well.
Yes.
So
yep.
Yeah, if Danita can check on that, but.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Gail. Sorry, I misunderstood.
No, that's
okay, and as far as eligible applicants, they had to have obtained or renewed a 2022 food safety certification that was issued between June 21st, 2022 and December 31st. So then again, you do not need to provide the certificate at the time of application, but if the county committee questions or if we have some spot check procedures, you would just need to keep that food certification on file so we can determine as to when it was issued, as it needs to be between these two dates. And also for 2023 food safety certification, the certificate needs to be issued during the 2023 calendar year. Also, a very important part of this is you had to have paid eligible expenses, and that's described in a future slide. So at this time, when you're making application, we don't require you to bring in your invoices that are stamped paid, but we highly recommend that you keep those on file in case there's questions, if the county committee would like to request those, or if you're chosen for a spot check. So also eligible applicants need to be located in the 50 United States, the District of Columbia, the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico, Guam, American Samoa, the US Virgin Islands, and the Commonwealth of the Northern Marina Islands. So ineligible applicants would be those that do not meet the definition of a small business or very small business, an operation that is not located in the US or US territories, or an applicant that has not paid the eligible expenses related to the 2022 or 2023 food safety certification. So again, the expenses need to be paid in order to, at the time of application. So the eligible expenses would be when you're developing a food safety plan for the first time for food safety certification, if you're maintaining or updating that existing food safety plan, the food safety certification upload fees, microbiological testing, and we can pay up to 5 per category, and training. And again, all expenses must have been paid at the time of application. Also, for eligible expenses, applicants are not required to apply for all categories, and they should cover all audits related to the certification. And producers can come back and modify their application if they incur more expenses after they file the application. So for developing a food safety plan for first-time food safety certification, we will cover a percentage of the costs of seminars and tools used by specialty crop operations to create a food safety plan. We will also cover a percentage of the consulting fees and other associated expenses incurred if the specialty crop operation hires a consultant to develop a food safety plan. For specialty crop operations certified through a group, this category of expenses will cover a percentage of their share of the cost for developing a food safety or quality management system for the group. We will cover a percentage of the cost of maintaining and updating existing food safety plans. And for specialty crop operations certified through a group, this category of expenses will cover a percentage of their share of the cost for maintaining or updating an existing food safety management system for the group. We will also cover a percentage of the cost of obtaining food safety certification issued by a certifier, including application fees, inspection costs, inspection fees, including travel costs and per diem for certifiers, and user fees or certifier sales assessments. And for a certifier, either a private entity accredited for the purpose of providing the food safety certification or a government-based certifier. And also just keep in mind the date of certification must be on or after June 21st. We'll also cover a percentage of the cost to upload audit reports and certification documents into the commercial audit databases. Also for microbiological testing, we'll cover a percentage of the cost of microbiological testing for products, soil, amendments, and water as specified by a food safety plan or food safety management system. And we will cover up to a maximum of 5 tests per category. will also cover the cost of food safety training for the specialty crop operation. Some of the ineligible expenses would be the infrastructure improvements, such as improvements to buildings, cold storage, flooring, restrooms, and hand washing stations. Another ineligible expense would be equipment such as grading, packing lines, and sanitation equipment. Supplies such as sanitation and cleaning supplies and personal protective equipment is ineligible. And salaries or benefits of employees or other costs for labor, except for expenses for consultants or fees or penalties for late payment. So those are the ineligible expenses. So how do you apply for this program? You may apply at any USDA service center nationwide. And of course, we have all of our FSA county offices in the USDA service centers. And you can apply in person, via mail. Of course, it must be postmarked by the deadline, email, fax, or on farmers.gov. Additional information. If we request any additional information, then FSA must receive that within 30 days of the request for the application. And also, as I stated, you're not required to provide the invoices or the certificate at the time, but please make sure to maintain your documentation for 3 years after the application period. So you will come to a service center, or of course via mail or through farmers.gov, and you would complete the form FSA 888, which is the food safety certification for specialty crops application. And expenses must be paid prior to applying. Applications may be amended or withdrawn at any time until the end of the application period if you have additional categories and expenses, or if you need to remove any. So payments. So this is probably one of the most important things that you are waiting to hear. The category of eligible expenses and what percentage that we will pay. So for the development of a food safety plan for the first time certification, for those historically underserved applicants, we'll pay a 75% of the cost, and all other applicants would be 50%. For an eligible expense of maintaining or updating your food safety plan, that would be 75% for historically underserved applicants up to a maximum of $375. And all other applicants would be 50% up to a maximum of $250. And an eligible expense for food safety certification would be, for historically underserved applicants, would be 75% up to a maximum of $2,000. And for other applicants, it would be 50% up to a maximum of $2,000. The expense of certification upload fees would be 75% up to a maximum of $375. And for other applicants, it would be 50% up to a maximum of $250. And for microbiological testing of products, keep in mind we would pay for 5 tests. And for historically underserved applicants, it would be 75%. And for all other applicants, it would be 50%. And also for the biological testing soil amendments, it would be historically underserved producers, we would cover up to 75%. All other applicants would be 50%. And for the testing of water would be 75% for historically underserved and 50% for other applicants. And for eligible expenses for training would be 100% up to a maximum of $300 for historically underserved applicants, and all other applicants would be 100% up to a maximum of $200. And the payment calculation would be the applicant's eligible expense times the percentage of the applicable category, not to exceed the maximum amount. and an applicant must report any previous cost share assistance received for the expenses included on their application, the amount of the applicant's food safety security for specialty crops payment, plus the reported additional cost share assistance cannot exceed the total amount of eligible expenses for each category. So I've listed a few other resources and helpful websites that would be available. It would, for the food safety certification for cost share information, that is available on our farmers.gov website at these links, and also for the USDA Agriculture Marketing Service, there's also information as well. And that is all I have at this time. And if there's any other questions, you can also certainly send me an email as well if you have any questions. My email address is danita.gary@usda.gov. And I can certainly find any answers for you. Again, this program is fairly new to us, but we're excited to administer it. And also keep in mind, we also do have a similar program for organic producers, such as the Organic Certification for Cost Share program, where we'll pay a cost share for your cost of obtaining organic certification as well. So just a plug there for organic producers.
Thank you so much for going over that, Danita. And if anyone has any questions that come to mind, pop them in the chat, or I'll include her email when I send out some follow-up as well. Now I think we'll shift into Rhoda. Do you have a PowerPoint for us today?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
So, and you can tell me if I've put it on the right screen or not.
And while we're jumping between, I'm going to put in the chat a link for an eval. So after Rhoda's done today, if you just want to pull this tab up now, we'd love if you could take a couple minutes and complete this evaluation. Helps us out with our reporting. So thanks. Whenever you're ready, Rhoda.
Okay. So I wanted to talk about two different programs that sometimes get confused because one is a certification program, and that's what's we're talking about today for reimbursement, and the other is FSMA, which is a law. And so just to go into those two a little bit. But before I do that, I wanted to sort of set the stage by reminding everyone why we're going through this in the first place, not just to be able to sell our food to certain buyers, but to make sure that our food is safe and that we're not responsible for making somebody ill. Just sort of an overview of some of the contamination sources that you'll have to think about, regardless if you do a GAP certification or if you're becoming FSMA compliant, and I'll go into those terms in a minute. But basically, our contamination is coming from animals, humans, other animals, through some vehicle, whether it be soil or water or direct contact. So that's kind of the stage that we're looking at, all these different components of your farm and looking to see that they're safe. And so routes of human contamination, basically it all comes back to feces sooner or later, with the exception of hepatitis and blood contamination. But that can be spread through many different routes. And so these would all be things that would be in a food safety plan. As well as if you have a packing area, that is one of the areas where you can get a lot of cross-contamination. And so we need to pay particular attention to that. And so that's another part of the training, is reducing risks in those packing areas. So those are all things that would go into a food safety plan. So I said I'd talk about the difference between FSMA, which is under the FDA, and GAPS, which is under the USDA. GAPS is a certification, well, go to FSMA first. FSMA is the law for farms with produce sales, fresh produce sales over, it's currently at $29,245 a year. And that's why I asked about the inflation adjusted, because the FSMA definition is adjusted. It started out at 25,000. It's currently at 29,000 over a 3-year average. There's, once you get over that 29,000, there's a qualified exemption if over your half of your food, and now we've got expanded from produce to food, and food can include grains that are sold for human food. It can include livestock. So that's a much bigger pile there. If you're under 250,000, between under 500,000, excuse me, you can get an exemption if over your half of those are direct or local, and there's lots of definitions with that go with that. If anybody needs to know, we can walk them through it. Whereas GAPS is not law. You don't have to have GAPS to sell. Instead, it's buyer driven. Nobody would probably ever do certification unless their buyer required it or their insurance company required it. And the focus for GAPS is certifying, having somebody else come in and look at your farm to make sure that you're following the safety practices. FSMA is relegated to produce that's normally consumed raw, and they write that out very, I'll show you a definition in a minute on that. Whereas GAPS can apply to any produce farm. So potatoes fall under GAPS. Potatoes do not fall under the FSMA regulation because they're not normally consumed raw. GAPS, the annual inspection, of course, the farmer pays, and that's what this whole presentation today is about, is getting some help with that expense. FSMA will come in and inspect on a sporadic basis if you fall under the FSMA rule. It doesn't cost you anything. And generally they start with coming in and inspecting and asking you to change things. You could get fined or shut down if you continue to do things in a very poor way, or if FDA sees a grower doing something like using sewage sludge to water their produce, they would be shut down immediately. But anyway, so we've got a business model on the right, we've got a legal model on the left. FSMA focuses mostly on microbiological hazards, whereas GAPS goes a little bit further and includes chemical and physical hazards. So if you've got a packing plant, things like having protection around your light so that if the light breaks, you don't have pieces of glass in your produce, or chemicals. Whereas, like I said, FSMA mostly focuses on those microbiological hazards. Under GAPS, a food safety plan is required, and that's one of the reasons why there's money to help write that. Under FSMA, a food safety plan is not required. There are some records that are required, mostly around that you trained your personnel a few other specific ones like water testing and so forth. Whereas GAPs, there's record after record after record. So if you fulfill GAPs, there's now a GAPs has sort of rewritten some of their sections so that if you fulfill GAPs, you will also be fulfilling FSMA. There's a few differences between them in terms of training requirements for FSMA versus GAPs. And GAPs requires annual training. FSMA requires training sufficient to the need, but anytime you've got new workers or you have new tasks. Now, the FSMA covers only food that is normally consumed raw. So some of the produce it does not cover is asparagus. And some of us eat asparagus raw, but apparently the government didn't find that in their survey. Same thing with sour cherries. And you can see here peppermint. Also exempt is anything sold solely for processing. So our grape growers, when they're selling grapes to the winery, they're exempt from FSMA, but they actually have to get a statement from the winery certifying that their crop went to the winery. It does apply to edible flowers, green beans, which I don't eat raw as much as I eat asparagus raw, but hey, it does apply to summer squash, chard, yams, you know, you get the idea. The exemptions, as I mentioned, if you're under that 29,245 in produce sales per year, you're totally exempt from FSMA. Between 29,000 and it's now 585,000 inflation adjusted can be qualified exempt. You just have to maintain the records on your food sales and who they're going to. And local is considered direct to the consumer, restaurant, or retail in the same state or within 275 miles. This exemption, of course, can be withdrawn. The FDA can basically come in at any point if there's a high chance of an outbreak. They can intervene. So these exemptions do not apply to GAP at all. So going over to the USDA then, on the harmonized GAP audit program, and that's what we're talking about, the harmonized, that is to be harmonized a little bit more with the FSMA standards. And they're working on that. But so if you look for USDA harmonized GAP audit program, this screen will come up, and that gets you into all the audit information. And so we're covering things like, here's an example. The food safety standard for producers is 42 pages, and it will be lists the requirement and then the procedure of how you meet that requirement. And then it gives information for the auditor to, this is what the auditor will come in and see if you've done, and any corrective action. So we've got 42 pages of this covering all aspects of your program. You can see why this can get to be a little bit costly. Now, GAP audits, unlike FSMA, where somebody can come in at any point, a certifier won't come in unless you have requested a GAP audit, and they will come in at each crop harvest time. So if you have crops harvested, different crops harvested throughout the year, each crop has to be audited separately. So if you've got a very diverse operation, it's kind of hard doing a GAP audit. That's why, as far as I know, the only GAP certified, or at least the only ones listed that were uploaded has been GAP certified are Jensen Farms over in Brookings, and they can have somebody come in and look at their green beans and sweet corn at the same time and verify that process. So they'll come in and do the general farm review, including the food safety plan, but then they pay particular attention to the field harvesting and field packing activities, making sure that those are being undertaken in a safe way. Must have, that's an interesting spelling, food safety plan and keep relevant records. And it also will include traceability. And FSMA also talks quite a bit about traceability, and that's so that you know when your product goes to the buyer can look and give you a code that says, this was sold to such and such a person, it was harvested on such a date, it was put through the packing house on such a date, it came out of this particular field. And if it's applicable, you may also want to have what employees harvested that particular field. So then you can go back and if you don't have that traceability and somebody gets sick, you could end up having to destroy all your product because you don't know where the affected produce came from. And so there's some fairly simple coding things that can just be slapped onto a label on a box. But traceability means that you can do mock trace audits as well, that somebody comes and gives you a code and you come back and tell them the information needed. Now, costs are per hour for audit time, and this was the most recent I could find. I couldn't find any for certain for 2022, but $115 per hour. So for a regular farm, it could easily cost $1,000 or more for an audit. And since we don't have auditors within the state of South Dakota, we also have to pay travel time for an auditor to come in. And that's where costs can really add up quickly.
Is that, I'm sorry, is that where Donita was talking about group certification? Is that where this would come in?
Yep, and as a matter of fact,
oh my God,
you gave me a great segue. So there is something that's called group GAP, and something like one of the food hubs might want to look into that. You still have to pay for the individual crop, but you can bring in an auditor. Well, actually, I'll back up a second. You have a third option, and one is several of you go together and bring out an auditor at the same time. And then you share the travel expenses, but everything is audited separately. With a group GAP, you actually have a member that's designated as an inspector that goes out and inspects each member's farm and doing that sort of internal audit. And then that's under the general inspection of an outside third-party auditor. So it saves you some on the money. It still can be fairly expensive, but all the group members have to operate under a single quality management system, which means you're talking about food safety plans, and they're all agreeing that they're going to follow these kinds of guidelines and so forth. But it can be done. So questions that the USDA under the group GAP, and you see this website up at the top. If you have a group of producers that are ready to implement GAP, they each have individual farm food safety plans, and they're committed to implementing food safety practices and probably to visiting each other's farms and making sure that each member is comfortable with what every other member is doing. And if that group has or is willing to hire individuals to write and implement this quality management system and to meet the requirements to be a USDA auditor. So, and I can't tell you what the requirements are for the USDA audit, or I know there's some training with that, but I have to admit that that's something I didn't look into very deeply. And here's my contact information. So any other questions?
There is one question in the chat. How would food or produce aggregation affect small specialty crop producers regarding the FSMA exemption?
It's going to come down to each member and how much they're providing. There's kind of some ins and outs about whether or not that's considered local. And if you retain ownership, it's simpler and more straightforward. If the food hub, for example, is buying the produce, then you're selling to a middleman. And I don't think that's exempt, but those are some areas where I usually have to stop and ask my colleagues who are a little bit more well-versed in the food hub management side of things. Does that answer your question, Matt?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Okay.
Just curious. I just know that as a small producer, the idea of the food aggregation was very appealing to me. But I was just curious how that would have affected the exemption. So that's kind of the answer I was expecting. Is it's complicated.
Yeah. Well, like I said, if you retain ownership of the produce and they're basically providing the selling service, then it's more straightforward. And I think that's the way Dakota Fresh is set up, isn't it? Or am I wrong about that?
It could be. I've talked to them and I can't remember their setup is.
But
Any?
it's something to look at when you set up a new food hub is to look at the implications of some of those for fairly small details for both insurance and food safety regulations.
If there are any other questions, you can unmute yourself or put them in the chat. Otherwise, Rhoda, I'm going to pick your brain quick with a question.
Okay.
So with the program through FSA, there's eligibility to be refunded for maintaining or updating a food safety plan. Is that for hiring someone to do it, or where do producers see that cost? Can they submit an invoice for their own time, or do they go somewhere to have that done?
I'll answer part of that and then send it back to Gail or Danita. There are websites that have templates that you can use, and I don't know if any of those actually charge, or the ones I'm familiar with are mostly free, I think. On-farm food safety.org has one that's pretty slick. But I would presume most of that's contract time. Is that correct, Danita or Gail?
Sorry, I'm trying to unmute. I'm not sure on that. I can get an answer on that.
I was happy to see 100% of the training cost is covered up to $200 or $300, if I remember right. I was looking at a GAP's online training out of Cornell today, and that's $225.
Just as a note along those lines with the different percentages, I did put the link to the fact sheet for the food safety certification FSA program in the chat. And so folks could find it there as well. And I can always send it off to Laura too, and Rhoda. I don't know if you have that. I can get that sent off your way so you have it handy, because it actually includes that nice chart, and it's just only a couple pages. So a lot of times, a lot of federal programs have a lot of pieces of paper and information. So if that's helpful, it's in there, and I'll send it to you too as well to share. But if other folks can see it in the chat, you can click on that link and have the fact sheet.
Thanks, Gail. And I'm going to put the evaluation in the chat one more time. If you can click that and take that, it should just be a few minutes. There's 3 parts to it. The third part is optional. Otherwise, I'll be sending out the recording, and I'll include Rhoda and Danita's emails as well. So if you have questions, you can contact them. Otherwise, thank you very much for your time. Thank you everyone who joined us today. Thank you, Gail and Danita, for bringing us information on the program, and Rhoda for the great summary on FSMA and GAP certification.
And if anybody's to the point they're wanting to develop a food safety plan, they're welcome to contact me for some of these templates and other information.
Thank you so much. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.